The vast expanse of space hummed with tension as the Galactic Confederation gathered for an emergency summit. Representatives from hundreds of advanced civilizations crowded the massive circular chamber, their holographic displays flickering, with urgent data streams. At the center, a terrifying projection showed the approach of the Void Marauders, a species that consumed entire planetary systems like a cosmic plague. Jay Park sat quietly at the back of the human delegation area. His dark eyes scanned the room, taking in the nervous whispers and anxious movements of alien diplomats. Most species were already planning their retreat, discussing evacuation routes and potential sanctuary worlds far from the approaching threat. The Zelara representatives from the northern quadrant spoke first. Their crystalline bodies trembled as they outlined the Void Marauders' destruction. Planet after planet had been stripped clean, entire civilizations erased in moments. Advanced shield technologies meant nothing. Weapon systems collapsed within seconds of engagement. "We must withdraw," announced the Xylara Prime Coordinator. "Survival is our priority." One by one, species agreed. The Quantum Collective, the Silicon Confederation, the telepathic networks, all decided that strategic retreat was the only viable option. Billions would be saved by running, by hiding, by abandoning their current territories. Jay Park stood up. The room went silent. "Humans volunteer," he said simply. Whispers erupted. Confusion spread across alien faces. The human delegation consisted of only 12 individuals, a mix of military strategists, scientists, and technical specialists. Compared to the massive delegations of other species, they looked almost comically small. The Confederation leader, a massive tentacled being from the Andromeda clusters, leaned forward. "You understand the threat? The Void Marauders have destroyed civilizations thousands of years more advanced than yours." Jay Park nodded. "We understand completely." What the other species didn't know was that humans had been preparing for this moment. Years of studying impossible scenarios, developing adaptive technologies, and creating psychological warfare strategies had led to this point. Where others saw certain destruction, humans saw an opportunity. Admiral He Kim, standing beside Jay, activated a small holographic display. Preliminary research showed potential weaknesses in the Void Marauders' communication systems. Their collective consciousness, while powerful, had specific neural network vulnerabilities that could be exploited. The room watched in stunned silence as Park outlined a preliminary strategy. It wasn't a traditional battle plan. It wasn't even a conventional defense mechanism. It was something entirely different, an approach that combined psychological manipulation, technological innovation, and a willingness to take risks that other species considered insane. "We don't just want to survive," Jay Park explained. "We want to solve the problem permanently." Scientist Yeon Choi stepped forward, her hands moving quickly across a portable computational device. Complex algorithms and potential scenario models danced across her screen. Where other species saw mathematics, she saw opportunity. The alien representatives exchanged uncomfortable glances. Humans were known for being unpredictable, aggressive, and somewhat primitive by galactic standards. But they were also known for something else, an incredible ability to adapt and overcome seemingly impossible challenges. As the meeting concluded, most species prepared evacuation protocols. The human delegation, however, began preparing something entirely different. They weren't planning to run, they were planning to fight. Jay Park looked at his team, 12 humans against a threat that had consumed entire civilizations. The odds were impossible. The challenge was insurmountable. Most rational beings would call their mission suicide. But humans weren't most rational beings. They were something else entirely, and the Void Marauders were about to learn exactly what that meant. The mission had begun. The human research facility buzzed with intense energy. Wu Jin stood at the center of a massive circular room, surrounded by holographic displays and complex technological systems. Around him, engineers, scientists, and military strategists worked with a focus that bordered on obsession. They weren't preparing a traditional military response. This was something entirely different. Major Wu Jin understood that conventional warfare would fail against the Void Marauders. Their technology was generations ahead of most known civilizations. Direct confrontation would be suicide. So the human team decided to do something unexpected. They would fight with intelligence, not just weapons. Su Min, the lead engineer, worked on a series of adaptive communication disruptors. These weren't standard jamming devices. They were complex neural network interceptors designed to create confusion within the Void Marauders' collective consciousness. Each device was a tiny masterpiece of technological innovation, capable of sending multiple contradictory signals simultaneously. "We're not trying to destroy them," Su Min explained to her team. "We're trying to confuse them completely." Hyun Lee, the strategic analyst, developed psychological warfare protocols that seemed almost ridiculous at first glance. Traditional military experts would have laughed, but these protocols were based on deep psychological research, understanding how collective intelligence could be manipulated. One screen showed complex mathematical models. Another displayed potential communication disruption patterns. A third tracked potential psychological weak points in the Void Marauders' collective decision-making process. The team worked in shifts, rarely sleeping, consuming massive amounts of caffeine and nutrition supplements. They knew their window of preparation was limited. The Void Marauders were approaching and time was running out. Wu Jin walked between workstations, reviewing each team member's progress. He wasn't just a military leader, he was a conductor, ensuring every part of this complex machine worked perfectly. Their approach was simple, yet revolutionary. Instead of building bigger weapons, they were creating intelligent disruption systems. They would turn the Void Marauders' greatest strength, their collective intelligence, into their biggest weakness. Su Min's communication disruptors could send thousands of contradictory signals per second. Imagine a being that could process millions of information points simultaneously, suddenly receiving conflicting instructions. The psychological impact would be devastating. Hyun Lee's psychological models went even further. They weren't just about confusion. They were about creating deep fundamental doubt within the Void Marauders' collective consciousness. "We're going to make them question everything," Hyun explained during a team briefing. "Their unity, their purpose, their very existence." The facility was a controlled chaos of innovation. Some devices looked like simple metallic cubes. Others were complex neural network interfaces. Each represented months of research, countless failed experiments, and a unique human approach to problem solving. Outside the facility, the world continued normally. Most people had no idea that a small team was preparing to face a threat that had consumed entire civilizations. They didn't know that humanity's survival might depend on the work happening in this single room. Wu Jin understood the stakes. This wasn't just about saving humanity. This was about proving that intelligence and creativity could overcome raw technological power. As days turned into weeks, the team's preparation reached a critical point. They weren't just building weapons. They were constructing a complex psychological trap designed to completely destabilize the most advanced collective intelligence in the known universe. The Void Marauders were coming. Humanity was ready. Not with massive battleships, not with planet-destroying weapons, but with something far more powerful, pure, unbridled human creativity. And they were going to change everything. The first visual contact happened exactly 72 hours after their initial preparation. Captain Kibong watched the massive Void Marauder fleet approach, countless dark metallic structures that seemed to absorb light itself, moving with a disturbing collective precision. Traditional military strategies suggested immediate defensive positioning. But humans had something else planned. Yoonji's fingers danced across multiple communication interfaces. Her team had prepared thousands of sophisticated signal disruption protocols. Where other species would launch missiles, humans were preparing to wage a war of information and psychological complexity. The Void Marauders expected resistance. They expected traditional combat. What they didn't expect was complete psychological warfare. "Initiating first wave," Kaibong commanded. Suddenly, thousands of carefully designed communication signals burst across the electromagnetic spectrum. These weren't simple jamming techniques. These were complex, multi-layered messages designed to create fundamental confusion within the collective alien consciousness. One signal suggested immediate retreat, another indicated internal conflict. A third transmitted mathematical equations that deliberately created cognitive dissonance. The signals were so intricate, so perfectly designed that they would appear completely normal at first glance. Min-Seo, the tactical coordinator, watched the initial response. The Void Marauder fleet's movement became slightly uncertain, just for a moment. But in complex collective intelligence, a moment of uncertainty could mean everything. Their massive ships, which normally moved with perfect synchronization, suddenly showed micro-hesitations. Tiny breaks in their collective movement pattern that would be invisible to most observers. But humans noticed, and they were just getting started. The alien fleet covered millions of kilometers. Their technology was generations ahead of human understanding. They had consumed hundreds of civilizations. They were supposed to be invincible. Nobody told them about human creativity. Yunji sent another wave of signals. These were more complex, designed to create deeper psychological disruption, mathematical patterns that would challenge their collective understanding, communication protocols that suggested internal betrayal. The Void Marauders began to slow down, not retreat, not advance, just slow down. Qibong allowed himself a small smile. Humans weren't fighting with traditional weapons. They were fighting with something far more powerful. Pure, unbridled psychological manipulation. Each signal was a carefully crafted piece of psychological warfare, complex enough to be believable, simple enough to create fundamental doubt. The human team had spent months designing these exact communication strategies. Their approach wasn't about destruction, it was about creating fundamental uncertainty. The alien fleet's collective movement became more erratic. Tiny breaks appeared in their previously perfect formation, microscopic hesitations that would be invisible to most technological systems. But humans saw them, and they were just beginning. Min-Seo tracked the psychological impact. Their initial data models were proving correct. By introducing complex contradictory information signals, they were creating something unprecedented, a collective psychological breakdown. The Void Marauders had consumed entire civilizations. They had destroyed worlds without hesitation. They had technological systems that could process millions of information points simultaneously. They had never encountered human creativity. Qibong watched the fleet's movement. Where other species would have launched massive weapon systems, humans were conducting a war of pure information. Each signal was a weapon, each mathematical equation, a potential psychological destabilization protocol. "Continue signal transmission," he ordered. Yunji nodded, her fingers moving with practiced precision. The first engagement wasn't a battle. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, and humanity was just getting started. The Void Marauders were about to learn a fundamental truth. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a missile, it's an idea. The psychological battle entered its most critical phase. Commander J. Park watched the holographic displays, tracking every microscopic change in the Void Marauders' collective behavior. Da Yun, the intelligence officer, had prepared something extraordinary. Their strategy wasn't about destroying the enemy. It was about making the enemy destroy itself. Sung Ho, the quantum strategist, had developed a series of communication signals that would penetrate the deepest levels of the Void Marauders' collective consciousness. These weren't just messages. They were precision-crafted psychological viruses. The first wave targeted their fundamental communication network. Imagine a perfect machine suddenly receiving conflicting instructions from every single one of its components. That was what humans were doing, but on a galactic scale. Small disruptions began to appear. The Void Marauders' massive fleet, which once moved with perfect synchronization, now showed tiny breaks in its movement. Most species wouldn't even notice. But humans had been watching and waiting. Da-Yun introduced the next level of psychological manipulation. Their signals now carried complex mathematical patterns that challenged the very foundation of the Void Marauders' collective understanding. Each transmission was a carefully designed puzzle that would create deep, fundamental doubt. Sung Ho's quantum models predicted exactly how the alien collective would respond, and they were perfect. The Void Marauders began to slow down. Not retreat, not advance, just hesitate. In their entire known history, they had never hesitated. Consumption of civilizations was their primary function. They moved with a purpose that was beyond individual decision-making. They were a collective intelligence that knew only forward motion. Until now, Commander J. Park understood something fundamental about collective intelligence. Perfect systems have perfect weaknesses, and humans were experts at finding those weaknesses. Each signal was a weapon, each mathematical equation a potential psychological destabilization protocol. They weren't fighting with traditional weapons. They were fighting with something far more powerful, pure, unbridled human creativity. Dayun tracked the psychological impact. Their initial models were proving correct. By introducing complex, contradictory information signals, they were creating an unprecedented collective psychological breakdown. The alien fleet's movement became more erratic. Tiny breaks appeared in their previously perfect formation, microscopic hesitations that would be invisible to most technological systems. But humans saw them, and they were just beginning. Sung Ho's quantum models showed something remarkable. The Void Marauders' collective consciousness was starting to fragment. Not physically, not technologically, but psychologically. Imagine a perfect machine suddenly questioning its own purpose. That was the war humans were fighting. Commander J. Park gave a simple command. Continue signal transmission. Dayun nodded, her fingers moving with practiced precision across complex communication interfaces. The psychological warfare entered its most critical stage. They weren't just sending signals. They were introducing fundamental doubt into a collective consciousness that had never experienced uncertainty. Each transmission was designed to create a specific psychological response. Some signals suggested internal conflict. Others introduced mathematical paradoxes that would challenge their fundamental understanding of logic. The Void Marauders had consumed hundreds of civilizations. They had destroyed worlds without hesitation. They had technological systems that could process millions of information points simultaneously. They had never encountered human creativity. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the massive alien fleet began to show signs of internal conflict, not physical conflict, psychological conflict. Commander J. Park allowed himself a small smile. The first true battle wasn't about weapons, it was about understanding. And humans were about to teach the Void Marauders a lesson they would never forget. The psychological war had begun, and humanity was winning. The Galactic Confederation watched in stunned silence. What had begun as a seemingly impossible mission was transforming into the most remarkable strategic victory in known history. Admiral He Kim stood before the assembled representatives, his presentation showing the complete psychological dismantling of the Void Marauders. Where massive weapon systems had failed, human creativity had succeeded. Yura Kang, the diplomatic specialist, prepared to explain how 12 humans had done what hundreds of advanced civilizations could not. The Void Marauders, once considered an unstoppable force, were now a fragmented, confused collective. The final stages of the psychological warfare had been brutally elegant. Each transmission introduced deeper levels of complexity, challenging the alien collective's fundamental understanding of purpose and existence. Jun Huang's final data models showed something unprecedented. The Void Marauders weren't just defeated. They were fundamentally transformed. Their collective consciousness was experiencing something they had never encountered before: genuine uncertainty. "We didn't destroy them," Admiral Kim explained. "We made them question themselves." The alien representatives leaned forward. Holographic displays showed the Void Marauder fleet, once a terrifying mass of synchronized destruction, now drifting in apparent confusion. Their perfect collective movement had been replaced by something entirely different: uncertainty, doubt, questions. Human beings had turned psychological manipulation into a form of warfare that defied all traditional understanding. They hadn't used massive weapons. They had used something far more powerful: intelligence and creativity. The Quantum Collective representatives looked shocked. The Silicon Confederation diplomats seemed almost embarrassed. Generations of advanced technological development had failed where human creativity had succeeded. Yurakang's presentation demonstrated how carefully designed communication signals had penetrated the Void Marauders' collective consciousness. Mathematical patterns, contradictory information streams, and complex psychological triggers had done what no weapon could. They had made the unconquerable questionable. The human team hadn't just defended humanity. They had potentially saved hundreds of civilizations. And they had done it without firing a single traditional weapon. Admiral He Kim's final slide showed a simple message. Creativity is the most powerful weapon. The Galactic Confederation sat in stunned silence. Humanity, once considered a young, primitive species, had just rewritten the fundamental understanding of conflict resolution. They had shown that psychological complexity could be more destructive than any physical weapon. The Void Marauders' massive fleet now drifted aimlessly. Their perfect collective consciousness had been replaced by something entirely different: individual uncertainty, collective doubt, questions where there were once only answers, possibility where there was once only certainty. Jun Huang's final mathematical models proved something remarkable. By introducing complex psychological triggers, they had essentially infected the Void Marauders' collective intelligence with something unprecedented: the ability to doubt. "We didn't destroy them," Yurakang repeated during her diplomatic presentation. "We gave them the most dangerous gift possible: the ability to question." The human team had transformed from potential victims to saviors of entire civilizations, not through brute force, not through advanced technology, but through pure, unbridled human creativity. The Galactic Confederation would never be the same. Humanity had just changed everything, and they had done it with nothing more than intelligence, creativity, and an understanding that the most powerful weapon is not a missile. It's an idea, a question, doubt. The redemption was complete. Humanity had arrived, and the universe would never forget.